What's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I am very excited to be back in MLB season right now and to be bringing you guys our Benny's Bats series over here at rotocurve.com. What we do in the Benny's Bats series is every morning I'm going to be bringing you guys a breakdown of all the matchups in the major leagues for a given day. What we like to do is look at the pitchers that are on the mound, try to figure out what their weakness is, and then try to figure out which hitters on the other team have the best profile to do well against them. We're going to be going through each game on the slate. I broke the video up into two segments today because we have a 7-game set that's starting at around 1 o'clock today. I think 1:05 is the first pitch. And then we have another 5-game slate that's starting at 7 o'clock tonight. So I broke it down into an early and late video. So if you're someone who's playing in the all-day games, make sure you watch both the early and late video. This way you have all the information. If you're only playing one or the other, we split it up. This way, if you're putting in early lineups, you can look at the early video. And if you're putting in late lineups, you can look at the late video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first matchup we have today is Houston Astros versus the New York Yankees. So we got Dallas Keuchel pitching for the Houston Astros. Now, Keuchel was great last season. He's a left-handed pitcher. Left-handed batters only hit 177 against them. So I guess his weakness would be right-handed hitters who hit 227 against them. He had a whip of 1.10 against right-handed hitters, and he gave up 14 home runs in 180 innings pitched. So not a lot of home runs in there, not a lot of hits, not a very high whip. Definitely not somebody we want to target too many guys against. Looking at that Yankees team against left-handed pitching, A-Rod is probably the guy who stands out the most. He had a 389 WOBA with a 269 ISO score against left-handed pitching last year. So he's probably the biggest bat that, the Yankees have that they can throw out there against Keuchel. Now, a couple other guys, they did bring in a guy like Aaron Hicks, who had a 375 WOBA and a 188 ISO against left-handed pitching. He does hit left-handed pitching pretty well, and he's probably going to be taking over for that Chris Young role. If you remember last year, anytime the Yankees played a lefty, we always wanted to get Chris Young in the lineup, but Young signed with Boston in the offseason. So I think that, Hicks and A-Rod are probably the two biggest guys that you have there. But again, Keuchel's a very good pitcher. You're going to have a lot of aces on the mound today, so there's not a lot of great spots. I don't think this is one I want to have a ton of exposure to. The next matchup we're going to talk about is Masahiro Tanaka going up against the Houston Astros. Versus left-handed batters last year, he gave up a 223 batting average, but he gave up 13 home runs in only 73 innings pitched. So basically about a home run every 5 or 6 innings. Versus right-handed batters last year, they only had a 219 average against them, but they too hit 12 home runs in 80, they hit 12 home runs in 80 innings pitched, which is about a home run every 6 to 7 innings. So Tanaka basically gave up a home run about every 6 innings. He's one of those guys that doesn't give up a ton of base runners, and he's okay giving up a home run every now and then as long as he's striking out and getting out, most of the rest of the guys. He gives up a lot of solo shots, which is a good thing. But it's also something that we can target against on the other side. So with us knowing that he gets tagged for home runs, a couple guys that we want to look at. The best hitter against right-handed pitching that Houston had last year was actually the rookie, Carlos Correa. He had a 359 WOBA with a 209 ISO score. So he's definitely somebody that's in play. I don't think he's very expensive today. I want to say like $4,100 on DraftKings, which I think is a reasonable price for him. Where I do think you can get some sneaky upside, though, is looking at some of the left-handed power bats that are going to be in that Houston order. You got guys like Colby Rasmus, who is projected lineups I'm looking at have him batting cleanup. So left-handed hitter batting cleanup in Yankee Stadium against a guy who gives up a lot of home runs. Definitely think that's something that we want to keep an eye on. Also have Preston Tucker. If you guys remember, he was a young hitter last year, did some pretty good work for this Houston Astros team. So I think Preston Tucker is another guy we can look at. And then a cheap salary-saving long shot that I'm going to be using in some GPPs today is going to be Luis Valbuena. Again, left-handed hitter, third baseman for Houston. Pretty cheap. I think he's like 32 or 3,300 over on DraftKings. He had some pop last year. He did hit a lot of home runs. And again, left-handed hitter in Yankee Stadium against a pitcher that's been known to give up the home run. These are some guys that you can look at for GPPs. I think Correa is probably the top play here. But some of these other left-handed power bats are definitely guys that are in play. Next game we're going to talk about, San Francisco at the Milwaukee Brewers. We got Madison Bumgarner going up for San Francisco. Right-handed bats have probably been the better way to attack him, although he's been good against everybody. Right-handed hitters had a 226 average, which is higher than the 206 that lefties had. His whip to lefties was below 1. He's very tough on lefties. Bumgarner being a left-handed pitcher himself, lefties do not hit well against him. Right-handed batters had a 102 whip, so it's not like they did very well either. And he gave up 19 home runs in 180 innings. So basically a little less than 1 every 10 innings. So again, not a guy that gives up a lot of home runs. The only guy on Milwaukee that I would really look to, roll into a couple lineups here and there, and probably mostly for GPPs, is Ryan Braun. Braun had a 408 WOBA and a 233 ISO score against left-handed pitching last season. So he is somebody that's in line for, a chance to get a couple hits, and he does have some power. He can go yard. I don't really want to target a lot of guys against Bumgarner, but Milwaukee is a good hitter stadium. And like we said, Braun does hit well against left-handed pitching, so he's probably about the only guy on the Brewers I would really want to roll out there. On the other side of this game, though, I think we can roll a lot of these guys on San Francisco out. We got Willie Peralta as the opening day starter for the Milwaukee Brewers, and he's one of the top guys that we want to target against. Left-handed bats hit 309 against him last year. He had a whip of 154 to both lefties and righties, and he gave up 9 home runs in 54 innings to left-handed bats, so basically about 1 every 6 innings. Right-handed bats hit 295 against him, same 154 whip, and they had 5 home runs in 54 innings. So I think you can even look at the right-handed bats. The left-handed bats are obviously in a better spot, but again, he gave up a 309 batting average to lefties, 295 batting average to righties. Basically everybody's in play on this San Francisco Giants offense for me. It's a good hitter's ballpark. They're getting a park bump switching from San Francisco over to Milwaukee. So I do think that, this is a game that we want to target, and I think this is one of those games that you do want to have a stack of if you're playing in some tournaments. A couple guys to look at here. Hunter Pence, 370 WOBA, 216 ISO score. Probably going to be batting around 4th in that lineup, so I think he's in play. You can look at a guy that they just brought over, like Denard Span, who hits right-handed pitching pretty well. Span is a very sneaky, underrated fantasy player. He gets a lot of hits. He'll steal some bases. He'll score some runs. He's going to be up on the top of that San Francisco order with some good hitters behind him that can drive them in. So I think he's in for a pretty big year, especially when they're on the road and, away from their bad hitters ballpark at home. You also have Joe Panik, second baseman, who kind of came out of nowhere. Had a pretty big season last year. 369 WOBA for him, 155 ISO. Not a lot of power there with Panik, but he does get on base. He does get a lot of hits. He'll drive in and score some runs. And then Buster Posey. Now, just be careful if you're looking at Buster Posey today. Apparently, he has some kind of illness. They said he got sick over the weekend, so he may not start today. Although I think he will, because they did send down Susak, who's the backup catcher. They do have another guy up there. I forget his name. Somebody else that they do have available as catcher. But obviously, if they could, they really want to have Buster Posey out there. He's one of their best hitters, former National League MVP, very good player, 362 WOBA, 143 ISO. So again, a guy that can hit the ball, drive the ball, but it's not going to get you a ton of home runs. Although in Milwaukee, it's a pretty good hitter's park, and you never know what he can do. A guy who I really like and I think is a little bit sneaky is Brandon Belt. 362 WOBA, 198 ISO score for Belt. He's somebody that's going to be hitting in the middle of that order, probably somewhere around 5th or 6th. I mean, again, this is the first game, so all we have is projected lineups to look at. We don't really know exactly how teams are going to roll guys out there. But Belt last year hit around the middle of the order in the 4, 5, 6 slot, depending on the game. So I'm assuming that's probably where he'll be here again today. He's got a little bit of pop, a little bit of speed, definitely a solid hitter. Again, good matchup against Willie Peralta, lefty on righty in Milwaukee, Millers Park, good hitters field. I think there's a lot of upside here. So the Giants are definitely going to be one of those teams that I think can put up a lot of runs today. They have one of the best matchups going up against Peralta. Next game, we're going to talk about Minnesota at Baltimore. Minnesota is throwing out Irvin Santana for this game. Lefties hit 260 against him last year. He had a whip of 1.40 and an ERA of 5.4 against left-handed batters. I think the guy that I want to target the most on Baltimore is going to be Chris Davis here. Chris Davis had some monster numbers against right-handed pitching. 410 WOBA, 350 ISO score. I mean, this guy was one of the better power hitters we had from the left side going up against right-handed pitching. In his home ballpark, Baltimore, Camden Yards, very good hitter's ballpark. A lot of home runs get hit there. So I really think this is a good spot for Chris Davis. Santana is actually a little bit tougher on righties, but Manny Machado is really good in same-sided righty-on-righty matchups. 384 WOBA, 232 ISO last year. Probably still going to be hitting up towards the top of that order for Baltimore. He is a guy that can steal a base for you. He can get some hits. He has some power, score some runs, drive in some runs. So he basically can fill up a stat sheet in a lot of different ways. Really like Manny Machado here as well. Don't like the fact that he's the most expensive third baseman on the slate, but I do think it's a pretty solid spot. So if you wanted to roll Machado out there, you're definitely not going to get any complaints from me. On the other side of that game, we have Chris Tillman. Now, Tillman is probably, I don't know, he's kind of like a middling pitcher. He had a 262 batting average against from left-handed hitters, which is what you would expect from a righty. He was actually worse against right-handed hitters, though. Right-handed hitters had 271 against him, had a whip of 1.33, and wound up with 17 home runs in 87 innings, which means about a home run every 5 innings there. I think his ballpark has a lot to do with that, but again, it's definitely somebody we got to look at here. The guy who I want to target against him the most is actually Miguel Sano. He's a 397 WOBA, 273 ISO. He was great in righty-on-righty situations after coming up from the minor leagues last year. Guy's got a lot of power. He's a young kid. If you don't know about this guy, I think he's the second most expensive third baseman on the board today. So that should tell you everything you need to know about how good he is, how good the matchup is, and the fact that they're in a good hitter's ballpark in Baltimore. So I think Sano is somebody you definitely want to look at and, definitely have some exposure to. Next game we're going to talk about is Seattle at Texas. We got King Felix going for Seattle. He's tough on guys from either side of the plate, right-handed or left-handed batters. I guess lefties would probably be the way you want to look at him. Against right-handed pitching, the top 2 guys that Texas had last year, Sin-Soo Choo had a 396 WOBA with a 218 ISO score. Also had a really rough start to the beginning of the season, so those numbers are really good considering that, at one point in the season, we weren't sure if this guy was ever going to be the player that he was and, the player that they gave the big contract to. The same thing could actually be said for Prince Fielder. Fielder had a 392 WOBA last year, but only a 164 ISO score. So he was hitting, he was getting on base, but he wasn't hitting for power, which is really what you want if you're going to be paying up at the first base position. And again, King Felix is a good pitcher. He did have a couple hiccups last year, but not somebody that I really want to target a lot of batters against. Same goes for the guy on the other side of the hill today. You got Cole Hamels, the lefty, going for Texas. Right-handed batters have done historically better against him, but not much better. And it's not like they have a really good average. They're slightly above 200, whereas left-handed batters are probably slightly below 200 against them recently. They do get a park bump. Seattle, the entire Mariners team will get a park bump playing in Texas, although the ball hasn't been flying out of Texas the way we normally think of that Texas stadium. It's not as great a hitter's ballpark as it has been, at least according to the numbers and the stats over the last year and a half or so. Now, there are a couple guys that I definitely want to target. There are 2 guys who are basically, absolutely kill left-handed pitching on that Seattle team. The first guy we're going to mention is going to be Nelson Cruz. His numbers against lefties last year were just absolutely eye-popping. 459 WOBA, 315 ISO score. Definitely one of the best options that we're going to have in this situation going up against any left-handed pitcher at all during the season. So Nelson Cruz, definitely somebody I would take a look at, even though it's a tough matchup. And then late in the year, when they really started doing well, they have a very lefty-heavy lineup there in Seattle. A guy named Franklin Gutierrez was somebody who started getting some playing time later on in the year and actually provided some really nice insurance and protection for them in the middle of that order. It basically goes, or at least last year it did. They had Cano batting third, they had Nelson Cruz batting fourth, and then they had Gutierrez either batting fifth or sixth, depending on where they had Kyle Seager in the lineup. And he was able to produce. He had a 411 WOBA and a 298 ISO score. Now, those are elite numbers for a guy who's pretty cheap. I think his price today is even down in like the $3,100, $3,200 range. Not somebody that I would ever roll out there against right-handed pitching, but when they play a lefty, this guy is definitely a lot better than the salary that he's getting charged. So I think Gutierrez and Nelson Cruz are the 2 guys that I really want to look at here as far as left-handed bats go up against. As far as right-handed bats go up against that left-handed pitching. Next game we're going to look at here, we got Boston at Cleveland. David Price making his start for the Boston Red Sox here. Price has been pretty tough on everybody. I guess right-handed batters is probably the way you want to go. 233 batting average last year, 1.10 whip for right-handed batters. That's probably where you want to attack him. Only gave up about a home run every 10 innings, so it's not a guy that I'm looking for a bunch of people to take him deep. And there really aren't a ton of bats on Cleveland that I want to take against them. You got a couple of those switch hitter guys there. Last year, if you remember, the cleanup hitter for the Cleveland Indians was Ryan Rayburn whenever they went up against a left-handed pitcher. The only other guy who had decent numbers against lefties was actually the rookie, Francisco Lindor. He had a 381 WOBA and a 200 ISO score against left-handed pitching. So Lindor is probably my favorite guy to take if you're going to go up against David Price. But again, we try to stay away from attacking the best pitchers, which is tough on a slate like this because it's the first game of the season. Everybody's basically throwing their aces out there. So like I said, Lindor is the guy in the best spot, but I don't know how much exposure I want to have to him against David Price. But I think he is eligible at shortstop and or second base. So he does play some of those tougher to fill positions for you. On the other side of this game, we have Corey Kluber. Kluber's a right-handed pitcher, absolute stud, strikeout pitcher last year. Left-handed bats were the ones that you could kind of attack him with. They hit 261 against him with a whip of 1.28. Right-handed bats were under 200 against him with a whip of only 0.83. So if you're thinking about rolling any right-handed bats on the Boston Red Sox out there today against Kluber, it's probably not going to work out well for you, although you can look at some of the lefties. Now, the obvious lefty that stands out is David Ortiz, Big Papi. 413 WOBA, 320 ISO score. So he did very well against right-handed pitching last year. Cleveland's not a great hitter's ballpark, so he doesn't really get much of a bump there. But I do think Papi is somebody who's in play. If you want to, there's a couple other guys you can look at. A guy like Travis Shaw just beat out, Kung Fu Panda for the third base position. He's a left-handed bat. He's somebody that's got a little bit of pop. Probably going to hit somewhere in the middle of the order, maybe fifth if Ortiz is hitting third today. We're not really sure how that's all going to shake out. If Ortiz hits cleanup, they'll probably hit him sixth to go with the righty-lefty thing. But I do think Travis Shaw is worth a look. Also think you can take a look at Brock Holt. He's another left-handed bat. Doesn't have a ton of home run power, but he is a guy that can drive the ball, makes good contact, gets a lot of doubles, probably scores some runs, may even be batting in like the second hole in that order. So if he's up there towards the top of this order, definitely think he's a pretty good guy. Again, Kluber's a very good pitcher. It's, not somebody I really want to target against. But if you are going to target against him, like I said, he has struggled more with the left-handed bats. So these would be some of the guys that I think you can look at. Next game, we're going to talk about Philly and Cincinnati once I get some Red Bull in me here. Ooh, okay. Raciel Iglesias, the rookie, going for Cincinnati. Limited innings pitched last year, but he was pretty good. Left-handed batters actually did the most damage against him. I think they had about a 285 batting average with a 154 whip. So you'd probably want to look at the lefties on that Philly team. Nobody really stands out to me. I mean, the biggest left-handed bat they have is a guy like Ryan Howard. There are a couple other lefties in that lineup, but again, nothing about this Philly lineup really scares me. Iglesias is a high strikeout guy. I've been hearing people talk about him being an option that you want to roll out there today. They do have a lot of lefties on this Phillies team that they can throw out there against them. So if you do want to take the chance and target against them, you can look at them. I just don't like enough of the lefty bats on Philly enough to really recommend them. Nobody really stands out on the numbers. Remember, this wasn't a great offense last year. They didn't do an absolute ton to it in the offseason to improve. So I'm not really looking for big things out of them. But I guess if you want to look for anybody to target against Iglesias, you probably want to look at some of the lefties. But remember, this guy was good late in the year. He was somebody that was a cheap option that people were rolling out there. He was racking up the strikeouts. He was shutting teams down. I definitely think he's a viable pitching option today. On the other side of the game, though, we have Jeremy Hellickson, affectionately known as Shellickson because he does get lit up a lot. Left-handed bats are the way you really want to attack him. 273 batting average, 145 whip. Gave up 8 home runs in 60 innings pitched to him. So obviously, when you're looking at this Cincinnati team, you got left-handed bats. You got guys like Jay Bruce, maybe a Billy Hamilton. The guy who really stands out to me though is going to be Joey Votto. I think he's one of the better plays in the day. I think he's in a great spot here. 423 WOBA, 235 ISO against right-handed pitching. He's the biggest left-handed bat that they do have on that Cincinnati Reds team. The game is in Cincy, good home run hitters ballpark. I definitely think that this could be a game where Votto can take Hellickson yard. I'm not, excuse me, not really a big fan of the Philly bullpen either. So even if they chase Hellickson early, I still think they're going to have some chances to score runs. So if you want to look at some of these left-handed bats in the Cincinnati team, I'm not going to stop you. Joey Votto being my favorite one, definitely somebody I want to make sure I have some exposure to on my early game rosters today. Next game we're going to talk about is Washington at Atlanta. So you got the Nationals going against the Braves. Max Scherzer is pitching for Washington. I mean, this guy had like a 180 batting average against. His whip was, below .8 last year. So I'm not really looking at anybody on Atlanta to target against them. He's equally as good against right-handed and left-handed pitching. Obviously, there are some guys who hit right-handed pitching well on Atlanta, namely Freddie Freeman, who's the big left-handed bat that they do have there. But, one of the things you'll notice and one of the ideas of this Benny's Bat section is we try to keep you from targeting guys that are in bad matchups. Anytime you got a Max Scherzer up on the mound, it's a bad matchup for the other team. So unless we're talking about a small 3 or 4 game slate, there is absolutely no reason to mess around with trying to take guys against a pitcher like Scherzer. So he's not even somebody that I'm really looking to target anybody against. Now, on the other side of that game, we have Julio Teheran. Now, Teheran is actually a pretty good young pitcher, but he did have some struggles last year, and his struggles mostly came against left-handed bats. They hit 300 against him last year, with a whip of 1.73 and an ERA of 5.34 against lefties. So if that's the case, we want to look at all these lefties on Washington to target. Now, there's this one guy on Washington. He's a left-handed bat, pretty good baseball player. His name is Bryce Harper. 478 WOBA, 358 ISO last year against right-handed pitching. So this is what we kind of look for here. This is the idea of the Benny's Bat section. You have a guy in Teheran who's struggling against left-handed pitching. He has a 300 average that he's allowed, a 173 whip, a 5.34 ERA. And then you have quite possibly one of the best left-handed bats in the entire league, and Bryce Harper on the other side. 478 WOBA, 358 ISO. Those are just obnoxiously large numbers. Those are some of the best numbers that anybody had in the entire league. And they might even be the tops last year, as far as guys going up against right-handed pitching. So obviously, Bryce Harper is going to be somebody that we're going to have a lot of exposure to today. It's not the greatest hitter's park down there in Atlanta, but he's already jacked some home runs out of there. A lot of people jack home runs out of there. It's not impossible to do. So I do think Harper's in a really good spot. 2 other guys that I want to look at. Daniel Murphy had about a 350 WOBA last year with a 193 ISO score. Again, that's, the end of the season. He had some big hits there for that Mets team. He was the Mets second baseman last year. Washington signed him in the offseason. He's probably going to be hitting 5th in this order from what I'm seeing in the projected lineup. So definitely think he's somebody we want to have some exposure to at a tough-to-fill second base position there. I think Daniel Murphy gives you, some upside in this guy that we want to have, some of on our rosters. The other guy I want to look at on top of this order, you got Ben Revere, who they brought over from Philly as their new leadoff hitter. They let Denard Span go. They put Revere in there. He's a guy with a left-handed bat. Had a pretty high average, can steal some bases for you, which is something that doesn't really show up in like the WOBA numbers. But I do think Ben Revere's in a good spot as well. So again, if you're targeting anybody against Teheran here, it's going to be the left-handed bats. That's probably the way to go. So that sums it up for our breakdown of the early slate. Again, we're going to be bringing you another breakdown of the later slate today. So if you're playing the all-day games or if you're playing the late slate tonight, make sure you watch both videos. This way you have the breakdowns of everybody there. As you can see from here, there are some guys that you want to target here and there. Willie Peralta is probably going to be the guy that you want to stack against if you're putting together a team. Just remember, it's probably going to be popular. There are a lot of good pitchers on the mound and guys who, most shrewd players are going to stay away from. So the Willie Peralta stat line in that game, being in a good hitter's park in Milwaukee is definitely something that a lot of people are going to be targeting. But again, for your cash games, we don't really care if everybody else is targeting the same stuff as us. We just want the thing that's most likely to succeed. And I would think that, targeting any of the bats on the San Francisco Giants against Peralta is probably going to be one of those things. So like I said, that sums it up for our Benny's Bat section for DraftKings MLB here at rotocurve.com. Thank you guys for joining us. And as always, be classy, DFS.